Hi, guys.
Hey there,
Hello.
how you doing? Nate, you're still going to training?
Yes. Uh,
What's the training?
it's for coaching youth hockey. So both of my kids are on Amherst Hockey Association League, and this year I'm on the ice for both teams, and I put it off as long as I possibly could.
Good luck, Dad.
I know it's out of my comfort zone a little bit, but it's been fun.
This is called stretching.
Stretching. I'm stretching.
Right, and do that before you get on the ice too.
Extending your horizons.
That means you get up really early in the morning, from what I remember.
Yeah,
Right, to ice time?
especially at the younger ages, but yeah, like the mites really, it's a crack of dawn. But it's a lot. It's 2 practices a week, 2 teams, 2 practices a week, and then games on the weekend.
Oh, Jesus.
So yeah,
Yikes.
it's a big commitment.
So have them write down that they really appreciate you. So like you can point it out like later in life.
Yeah, I think it's a volunteer position. It's but it's rewarding in its own way. So
But you should get major dad points.
Yeah, totally.
yeah, I don't know if my kids see it that way.
Maybe not now. Later, when they're dads, they will see.
There you go. There you go.
I wouldn't
It's an
count on,
investment.
I wouldn't count on that.
One can always hope, however.
One can hope, right?
So I know, so Graham is not coming and Zoe's not coming. So I think
Whoops.
we're all here. Zoe sent an email just a little while ago that she had a
Yeah.
family commitment. And Graham is partying with some friends from Australia that are here for the week.
Oh,
So they're out in the Berkshires.
yeah.
Yeah. So that sounds reasonable. If you're gonna-
We'll cry for Graham.
Yeah. So I think, Leslie, are you there?
You're muted.
I'm just getting organized in my kitchen, but
Okay,
I'm here and I know I'm on for minutes.
cool. Okay, well, I just wanted to make sure before I called us to order. So, okay. Well, I'll call us to order at 7:02. And hopefully you all saw, I sort of rejiggered the agenda time-wise just to make sure that we had the planning conversation about the community choice aggregation
Right.
event. Nate was here, and then we could sort of move on from there. And I think if since when Nate leaves, only be 4 of us, there might be some things we decide we can hold off on, but why don't we have that conversation when we get to the items, since we're missing 3 out of the 4 of us. So any public comment?
Seeing no public.
Yeah, seeing no public, we'll just move on. So in terms of the event, I guess the first question is, are we all good with planning on November 9th? Are we feeling like we have enough time? At this point, no town meeting has been set. So, we might have a little bit of flex if we wanted to push it back. I mean, the problem is we don't know when a town meeting would be. I think we wouldn't want to do it too close before or after Thanksgiving. So we can shoot for the 9th, but I just wanted to put it out there as like the first big question. So where are you guys at?
I think we should do it.
Okay.
Can I just speak like she did?
Yeah.
Like I really feel like we need to give the town choices between like what community solar is, what it really is. Because I spoke to a neighbor and friend and he thinks he has community solar, but he's got Next Dam, which is phony community solar. So I would like to be able to present to the town the real options, because I know a lot of people are looking at saving money, but I'm also looking at saving the forests and having clean energy.
So I think, well, okay, let me just respond and then you can jump in.
I think this is one of the chief virtues of our holding a forum, because we can hear then from residents what they really are interested in. And this question should, if it doesn't come directly, and I bet it will, can be answered. And then we can instruct the select board to make sure that that is an option that we put out there to be bid upon. Now, what the bids come back may determine whether or not that is included as the options in our final deal, but at least we will have put it out there.
Yeah, and I don't think,
Feel like if we don't put it out there with all the options clear, then I just know, I've spoken to some people in town, there's a lot of confusion about what community solar really is.
Yeah.
Nobody, so yeah, if it's information, that's good, but I'm nervous. I'm nervous. That's all. I'm just putting it out.
I don't think
Nervous
they're,
about what, Leslie?
I'm nervous. I don't know if nervous is the right word. I know Nate did a wonderful job of researching and giving a lot of information. And tonight we're going to hear from Mary Ann. And I just want the town to really see both sides. Because for me, I'm nervous about our select board. I'm nervous about our town administrator. I really want this town to stand up for its forests. And I want the choice to not just be, this is cheaper, because in my mind, what I have as community solar is cheaper if you don't have money or you don't have a clear view for the sun for solar. So I really want to make sure that community solar is represented in this meeting so that yeah.
So I guess I,
rush
Can I-
to get it.
Can I-
Go
can I make
ahead,
a
Mary.
comment?
Go ahead, Mary.
Well, I don't think the choice is one versus the other.
Right.
And I don't think we should be conceptualizing it that way, because one is kind of an easier reach and one is a more of a long-term, more complicated multi-year planning project. And it seems to me that the CCA is something that could happen within a 12-month period, whereas I think community solar is going to be a much longer process of planning. So I guess I don't want to pitch these two things as being, you have to choose, if you choose one, you're foregoing the other.
Yeah, I guess, can I jump in here? I mean, that's what I was trying to express in the emails. They're not mutually exclusive.
Right.
And I think, one thing that's been really clear is one can opt out of community solar CCA at any time. So doing it until if people wanted to change at some point, they can. So it's about more options as opposed to less. But there is there's a process and a timeline. And so we won't even get to what kind of energy we want to buy for a while. I mean, there's all these steps in between. And so I actually don't think it's productive to sort of say it's one or the other, because it can be both and people can switch and they can go in and out. And so it's really about what we have now is the least good. So let's move off of what the least good is and come up with options. So, Gail?
And we as a committee can be pursuing both at the same time.
Right. No, exactly. Yeah, that's my point. Plus, we're responding to the needs of the town. Leslie?
Well, for instance, like I joined community solar years ago, so people could join it now without us necessarily having our own panels on our own buildings. So I just want that to be an option, because again, maybe Nate has some more information, but as far as I know, in my research, there are no aggregates coming from real green options. So I don't want the town to say, well, great, we've got the community aggregates, and so, and those come from clear cutting. So I don't want this to open the door for Cinda Jones to,
Well,
that's my nervousness. That's
Yeah.
my,
Right, but I think you have to take off the personal thing, because we have to give the town options, not just ours. But Nate, did you want to say something? Because,
No, well, I would reinforce the idea that these concepts don't necessarily have to be in conflict with each other, and I think that the potential array of options that would come back potentially from a set of bids that we've specified requirements for, it is a little unknown for us at this stage in the conversation. I do have a question though, and I wish I could be here to ask it for later in today's meeting, but as I understand community solar, individual households buy a share of an existing solar arrays production capacity, and that interacts with your standard utility service, right? So you're getting some credit from that arrays production, but it interacts with your basic utility, whether it's National Grid or EverSource to some extent. So as I've been, and this is more of a question, but that I'm just wanting to pin down, but as I understand it, these are really compatible, like sort of non-conflicting efforts potentially, because there will always be that sort of base load production that you're drawing upon, and then community solar can offset that. But I have questions about that interaction, if you will, and then also questions about how an entire municipality would approach community solar versus individual households purchasing a share of an array's production. So, and that gets into funding. And I know we had the presentation before, but the more I've been thinking about it, I sort of have questions about how those puzzle pieces fit together. Because I absolutely want to make sure that Leslie's concerns are heard and influence the direction of this proposal.
so wait, before you go, so I got two thoughts. One is we wanted to plan for November 9th, and we have Mary Ann scheduled to come later to have a conversation. So we're sort of we're losing the planning time, and Nate has to leave in 18 minutes. So it's not a lot of time for the discussion, and we don't want to back into our first townwide presentation half-assed. So I think because we scheduled Mary Ann to come later, we should. I would say let's hold off on this conversation. The only thing I would say is if this would be a reason to push it back a little bit, because Mary Ann, I don't see them as in conflict either. But if we say, okay, we're not going to do it on November 9th, we'll have a planning meeting in early November and we'll offer this in early December, that gives us more processing time to sort of have discussion if people are having, reservations and want to have more information. So that's Gail.
It seems to me a real direct question for Mary Ann. Does Co-op Power have the capacity to respond to a bid for community solar in Shutesbury? And it may be that they can only do a few individual houses and not the whole community. So that would change things a bit. And that depends on whether she's willing to answer a bid for community solar for the town, really.
Okay. Well, Leslie,
I'd like to suggest that we try to work on planning right now.
Yeah.
I am concerned that we're not spending enough time preparing.
Yeah, and we're sort of spending.
I want
we're having
to make a comment.
Well, we're having the discussion, Leslie, that you wanted to have, but we're having it not at the right time in the agenda. And so we'll lose Nate, and Nate's going to be the primary presenter, I'm assuming, if we get confirmation of that. So unless he's part of this discussion, it's by default, we won't have a meeting on November 9th. We won't have a presentation. So we put it on the agenda for Mary Ann to come. We should have it when Mary Ann's present. So it should be, it's supposed to be the next block of agenda stuff. So turning to planning, if we continue on November 9th, I guess the first question, Nate, I'm imagining that this is a presentation of information where we give people the basics, we give them the timeline, we can have handouts, et cetera. And then there's time for Q&A. Is that sort of a rough format that people are imagining? Are there other components that we should include?
I think that makes sense.
Sounds right to me, especially if our informative FAQ on the website is available. That can be part of the outreach, just to let people know the basics in advance.
Okay. Gail, do you have thoughts, or Leslie, about that format?
Sounds good.
Okay. And I'm assuming we should do it by Zoom, just
Oh, yeah.
because we
Yeah.
haven't done, people are just not there yet, which logistically makes it easier because we don't have to worry about stuff. Gail?
But also point out that with the FAQs, we as a committee want to hear from the community.
Yeah,
Not just that here's the thing we're proposing. Take it or leave it. We want to know, what is it your real interests are? And it seems to me in that context, Leslie's concerns and other concerns related will come up in that.
so here's a suggestion. If I MC it and sort of welcome people and things, and then hand it off to Nate to do some version of the PowerPoint information. So Nate's our in-house expert. Gail, would you mind facilitating the Q&A? Because I think your framing of it is exactly right. That we want to hear from people, either questions, clarifications, opinions, preferences, all of that realm, and frame it as information gathering as well as information
If I
sharing.
don't have to answer the questions, I can direct the question
Yeah.
to be
Yeah,
answered to. Yeah, sure. Okay,
Okay.
sounds
Yeah.
good.
Okay. Cool.
But preface it with that, we want to hear from you. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Miriam.
One of the things I just wanted to make sure we talk about tonight a little bit is the email I forwarded to you from
Yeah.
Leverett Next.
You want to just share it?
Yeah, so I'm on Leverett Connects, which is a message board for Leverett residents and their larger community. It's sort of like, it's a little bit like eCricket, I suppose, but it's one of these message board groups, but I'm on it because my son lives in Leverett. Anyway, they have community choice aggregation, and this year people were reacting to the fact that the rates doubled in 1 year. And so there's an email that I forwarded to Michael with the response from their energy committee about that. And, there's explanations for why that is the case. I just think that we should be very familiar with it because people talk across the borders of Leverett and Shutesbury. And so, it's our close neighbor, and people might have, reactions like, oh, my good friend says it's blah, 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 and they're upset about it or whatever. So I was suggesting to Michael that either Michael or maybe Nate would be the best person to talk to somebody from the Energy Committee and kind of hear a little bit about how they're, how it's working for them and how they're responding to those concerns so that, we can have our best foot forward.
Nate and then Gail.
Just really quickly, Miriam, thank you very much for forwarding that. And I did reach out to Portia by email to see if she would be willing to give us the lowdown on their experience, because it would be independent insight into Colonial, which is sort of dominates Western Massachusetts as a broker. And then there's this additional issue of like what's happening with the rate hikes, and then hopefully what does that look like relative to what Eversource is doing with its basic default offering as well. So yeah, I absolutely agree with
Yeah, and if the rates are going up across the board and it's not specific or unique to community choice aggregation, and the bottom line is CCA is not a miracle worker. It's not going to be a cure for things that are hitting the energy industry as a whole. But I think just, especially if we're trying to in any way say this could make an affordable option, we should understand, what the limits of that are.
Yeah.
Are you saying, Miriam, that even with a contract for CCA, they raise the rates?
And I think it's a new contract.
I think it was the
Oh,
second,
okay.
it was another
So
contract.
once you sign a contract, those rates don't change.
They were locked in for a year, and then within
I see.
within a
Okay.
1 year, they went from, I think it was 11
And
cents
we're facing the same
improvement.
thing, because who knows what the rates are going to be
Right,
a year and a half
right.
from now.
And
Yeah.
so if it's true about the energy market as a whole, then it's, floods raise all boats, right?
right.
So,
Yeah. So one question I have, and Nate, is that a new hand up?
It is, because this is like super exciting.
Go ahead, and then I'll chime in.
Just really quickly, there's a really interesting conversation with Leverett's select board and their energy committee around whether to go with a 3-year contract or a much shorter one, on the assumption that once the conflict with Ukraine and Russia settles down, so they're making strategic decisions there. And it was an open contract, so they're trying to figure out how to handle this sort of dynamic. But that would come to us if we undertook CCA 2, having to make those kinds of choices for ourselves.
So, Gail, I'm gonna jump in for a minute. So
But
Nate, I just have a question about who's doing stuff. So Nate, if you end up talking to Leverett, and you've already done this research, do you feel like if someone asked that kind of question that you're able to respond? Because the other thing we could do is see if we wanted to invite a couple of folks from other towns, but then it gets sort of complicated, because we can invite Leverett, like we can invite Conway, but I'm guessing Leslie would not want us to have, because Leslie's not a fan of the Conway folks and their plan. So it depends on what towns we sort of invite, or we just leave it to you to sort of interpret, because you've been gathering different inputs. Like you've talked to Amherst, you'll have talked to Leverett, you'll have talked to Conway or heard from Conway. I think it's easier if you do it, but only if you feel comfortable representing different things. And we can always say we don't know, obviously, but the more we can share, the better.
I like the idea of having someone from Leverett come talk to us.
Well, I'm thinking for the for the forum.
Or for the forum itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Having Leverett come to us makes, like for our group, makes sense. I was wondering about the forum.
Yeah. It's I don't have a strong opinion about that. There are other
Okay.
hands raised. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'll go Gail, because I cut her off, and then Leslie.
Would it make sense, though, for Colonial to come to the forum to be able to answer a question as to what the market looks like and respond to this quick up change?
The only thing I wonder about that is for procurement perspective, although we haven't.
Does it look
As a-
like we're already hyping our guy? Yeah.
Yeah. And Leslie?
I think it's another reason to push the meeting back to December. And also regarding Conway, I would ask residents from Conway to come, not the guy who's invested, the people who are affected by what happened in Conway. I would love that. I would love that to be represented. And I'm still, it opens up a little salt wound for me here, because when I talk to the people who live near it, that to me is the truth, not Bob Armstrong, but I don't want to open that can of worms, but I want to also say that the community solar, there's a lot of different aspects to it. And I think Miriam is right that the town's not ready to do like we're gonna own it, but I think we can offer choices like I have right now to individuals, because anyway, I'll leave that for later, but I just wanted to kind of jump in there because I felt really cut off before and I was
Okay.
uncomfortable with that.
But yeah, I'm sorry about that. I just want to make sure that we actually talk about the event, because if we de facto don't push it off, that's a drag as opposed to if we just decide to push it off. I mean, do we feel right now, as far as I know, I haven't heard anything. If Gail or Miriam or anyone else has heard about the town meeting getting scheduled, I haven't heard anything. So, I mean, we could do it early December. And just sort of figure like the first week of December or something like that, where there's that slot between Thanksgiving and the holiday overwhelm where one has a little bit of bandwidth.
Might be better.
So, and then we can have some additional, we can hear from Mary Ann tonight. We can follow through at a November meeting to discuss stuff. I mean, I think that would be okay. It's not the end of the world. And we'll, if we have more information. It seems like that might be prudent. In terms of the who comes, it's just from this conversation, it seems like Native, you should just sit with like, if you're comfortable representing it. I think some of us know enough that we can respond to questions that people have. They've come up enough. There might be questions we don't know, but I think it's complicated having Colonial come for the procurement reasons, and it's complicated with the other towns because other town, which towns do you pick? I mean, Leverett is a neighbor for sure, but then it raises the question of why wouldn't we have Amherst come, who's creating their own CCA? Just like if we have done our research, we're the town committee who's sharing with our town. So it's on us to sort of be able to share what the landscape looks like. Yeah.
Which speaks to postponing the forum to early December, because that gives us time in the middle to talk with Leverett folks.
Yeah.
And we have that information without inviting them to appear at that forum. And we can appear at the forum as having done the research with other communities and blah, 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 blah.
Okay.
Well, I think it's also big that Leverett has this increase. And so I agree. Let's really
something
get
to
the
question.
information.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the last question, Nate, you're only getting trained once, right? So if we have our next month's meeting, most likely you'll be able to come to the meeting unless there's a game or a practice.
I'm prioritizing this meeting over practices.
Oh my goodness.
Uh,
Do you have assistant coaches?
There are, yeah, yes, there's a staff. I'm just one person.
Okay.
So
The other question, so I think just segueing, it seems like we've had a good enough discussion on this for now if we're going to postpone. Gail had raised the question of changing the day of the week so we're not conflicting with select board meetings. And I was thinking that maybe the most manageable way to do that is just do a little online survey amongst us, since it's all housekeeping. And I'm thinking out loud, like we won't be able to change the meeting in time for a November meeting. So it'll be, our Tuesday slot for November. So it sounds like, if I get everyone's responses, I could just make a unilateral decision and say, this is the winner.
Yeah.
Okay. So why don't we, I'll do that. And then just in terms of planning, we'll make sure that whatever we do, Nate, you'll know in advance, Nate, so you can blow off your practice accordingly.
Nate,
So-
what is the practice? Is it sports?
youth hockey.
Hockey.
So,
Thank
Gail.
A question about changing the date. If we were going to put out the town announcement to look at the Q&As and the blurb about proposing CCA, instead of saying a definite November date, can we just say later this fall, we will have a forum for questions and answers to present and answer?
Yeah, and I think you could say in advance of town meeting, we'll, you know,
And
because.
yeah.
Bye, Nate. Have
Goodbye,
fun.
Nate.
Learn a lot.
Good coaching.
Really. So yeah, I think that would be good. I guess the question is, if we're going to postpone it till early December, we have a little bit of time. Like, we don't want to.
We
Have
don't need to
people-
send out the DNA. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's Frederick who sent us the email. You know, it's sort of the canary in the coal mine. As soon as you say that you're doing this, people will start talking and have questions, and you don't want to have too many people asking questions if we're not ready to create the opportunity to answer them.
Well, I was thinking if you're mentioning in the our town newsletter,
Mhm.
and already we've gotten one question about, oh, that sounds great.
Right.
Yeah, we just postponed the announcement of it as a meeting and a forum and a vote.
Yeah, I think
The
just,
Q&As are up there if people want to look at them.
yeah, I saw them. That was good. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah. you're welcome.
You know, having it be on a web page where it's not pushed out, the percentage of people who are going to see it is very small.
Right.
so-
And then we can do the town announcement whenever.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, okay, so I'll do the online survey and we'll figure out a date.
Okay.
So that sounds cool. That was good. Leslie, thank you for your perseverance. I just needed to like make sure, I didn't want to plan something with Nate in the hot seat without him being in the room. That seemed a recipe for failure.
You can count on me for that. That's how I pushed my neighbor back, because I wouldn't give up.
Okay.
Even though I didn't have support of town,
Yeah.
I kept going, and
Okay.
I persevered. So you can, I don't know how many times I can keep doing it, because, but I'm gonna, as long as I'm here, I will push back, because I'm really looking for the most green solution here,
Okay.
and we can have it
Well,
if we
well,
want it. If we want it, I don't know where everybody really is at.
yeah, well, there's the committee and then there's the town, so it's sort of, that one's an unknown. So shifting gears, and Leslie, do you know when Mary Ann's gonna pop in?
I looked right before, I don't know. I kept
Okay.
wanting to connect with her, but then you changed the calendar. So I think I was supposed to send her the Zoom link. I'm going to do that right now.
Okay,
Do you have a time in mind? Because that's
well, we were gonna start talking about this section of it now.
okay.
And there's a couple, so this part of the agenda is really just talking about previously discussed initiatives, because we haven't just, you know, we talked about TCA, but there's all these loose threads of things that we didn't talk about. And we might want to have an abbreviated conversation and then circle back when, you know, more of us are here. But the four aspects of it were the sustainable living to reduce energy and carbon footprint, which was Leslie, was you and Zoe. Municipally owned solar options, we've talked about a little bit, but just sort of figuring out what our next steps were in that regard. Incentive, and part of that is incentivizing solar battery storage, which, you know, Gail had some input on, and then community solar as the last of those, and talking to Mary Ann and you about those options. So, and if she shows up a little late, we can sort of rejigger, but
Well, I'll send her an email now, and I'll also give her a phone call, but I'll send her the Zoom link. Tell me what your timing estimate is, and
I would say 10 minutes.
okay, I better give her a call then. I'll send her the link.
Okay.
What's her assignment for tonight?
She was going to provide some updates and information about community solar. Sort of like that's why I didn't want to have the conversation at the beginning, because she was gonna, the questions we were having. So,
Okay. Just checking.
yeah. Miriam, you still there?
Yes,
Okay, cool. I just gotta make sure we have a quorum.
I'm here.
So maybe while Leslie is on doing this call, you want to just do minutes real quick? Get that out of the way? Or you want to just wait until she pops back? What do you guys think?
We need her vote.
Oh,
Well,
yes, we do need her vote.
I'm listening, I'm just typing, and then I'm gonna make a phone call.
Yeah, I figured when you got the phone call, you couldn't,
All right, well, I'm gonna call her
Whatever.
now.
okay.
Miriam, I must say that you did almost verbatim minutes. You don't really need to go to such,
It's like a habit.
that's just the way you do it. Okay.
I can't like stop myself, so you're stuck with it.
Never mind.
Okay, well, if it was going to pop back, since we can talk but can't do much. Leslie, let us know when you're back.
I'm listening, but I'm dialing the phone now.
Okay.
So
Well,
a quick aside to you, Miriam. The spelling of Fleischhacker auf Deutsch has twice as many S's, C's, and H's as what it translated to in American, but it does have one of each.
Well, you know what? I had been trying to check my spelling on your name and I missed 2 of them. So the others, most of them were okay, but sorry about that. I know it's frustrating.
Not a problem. It's a usual.
Are you German?
My parentage, my married family is, and Fleischhacker, meat cutter, they were all butchers by trade.
Interesting.
So it was Fleischhacker, and they hacked some of those, thank goodness. So
What was your maiden name or what was your first?
Raney, Raney. So the Fleischhacker Zoo in San Francisco and a big batch of Fleischhakers in Washington, DC and in Ohio spell it this way.
Oh,
It's always interesting to see who spells it what way after Ellis Island.
well, one
And-
an interesting thing with my name is whether you capitalize the F or not.
Right. Right.
And a lot of the defunts who are like in the United States capitalize the F because my father's generation started capitalizing the F. But in Northern Italy, where my father's family came from, they don't capitalize the F.
Yeah.
So,
Interesting.
Yep.
Okay, so we're back in action.
Yeah,
Leslie's back.
I sent her an email, I left her a message, and hopefully,
We'll see.
Okay, so why don't we pick up? So the first of these things, of the initiatives we wanted to circle back was the sustainable living to reduce energy and carbon footprint, which is, sort of the Leslie and Zoe stream of what we're doing. And, we might want to put it off since Zoe's not here, but
Right.
I think the question is sort of next steps, like where do we go if we want to, prompt more discussion and education in town around this particular thread of stuff. So I don't know, Leslie, do you have thoughts about what you want to do, or do you want to just check in with Zoe and then we can talk about it next time?
I think it's good for me to check in with Zoe. I mean, I certainly have lots of thoughts, perhaps the library can sponsor something or we could sponsor something. But, I have not had a chance to talk to Zoe about what she's thinking. I know she and I are living it. So,
Yeah.
it would be easy for me to just blurt things out. But I think Zoe and I should have a conversation and create something like Nate did, a presentation.
Okay, that would be great. The one thing I'll just share, I went to the Amherst ECAC meeting a couple of weeks ago, which was it was interesting just to sort of hear how they were thinking. And it brought me back to sort of like what our charge is. And so some of these things, like the CCA for sure, municipally owned solar for sure, community solar for sure, sort of like system-wide, town-wide things. And the sustainability thing is sort of individual based. And I guess a question would be good for the community to have is, while we can offer educational opportunities for individuals, is there a way of sort of thinking about it more town-wide or systematically, and what that would look like? You know, so as an example, it just popped into my head, you know, we could look at town-wide composting for, you know, things like that. So it's not about changing one's lifestyle within your own household, but sort of like, what can the town as a whole, as a community as a whole,
Right.
push forward? So I think that might be a way to just for the two of you to think about it and then come back and just email me, you know, when you,
Okay.
after you've talked, and then we can put it on the agenda again.
Yeah,
Um,
I'll try to, you know, get together with Zoe soon around that. Yeah, I mean, I've got lots of ideas for the town as well. And it'd be fun to, you know, see if Zoe's thinking along the same lines, like, you know, get rid of some of the lawns and let's grow some things people could eat.
Right. Yeah, well, but there too, it's a household thing. So it's sort of like, is there a way of the town, if we were gonna have town-wide sustainability about food growing, for example, there's probably things the town could do to support that. It's up to the households to do it, but you know, Gail, I see your hand. I just want to finish this one thought. You know, another small example has nothing to do with sustainability, but at the highway department, they have a pile of, you know, sand that people can go get for their ice when it's, you know, so it's like,
Mhm.
there's things that this town can do to facilitate things. And so I don't think as a town committee, we shouldn't be telling people how to live, but we can
No,
be
no, no,
saying,
no. My thing was about the town getting rid of the lawns. Not,
Who's
you know,
lawn?
oh,
you
no,
know,
no,
The
all the
town lawn?
grass around could be used in different ways than just mowing with gas. You know, that we could be growing food on the town common.
well, okay, so for,
Yeah, those kinds of things.
yeah, Gail?
I was going to say, particularly regarding compost, check in with the recycling committee because they've been talking about this for years about if or how to set up a town recycling. Would it be trustworthy? Would it be qualified? Would it be, you know, all kinds of things, the criteria that would go into it.
You mean a
A lot
town
of people
posting?
compost their own. Would you trust a town compost heap? And if so, wouldn't you have to have criteria? What, anyway, all these questions.
Yeah,
So,
no, and I think it speaks to our whole job is to maybe come up with ideas and then figure out
Right.
who's doing it and who has expertise. But I think that's, so like, none, that hasn't been on our radar, but it'd be worth sort of exploring that kind of stuff. So
I
moving to,
agree. I just want to
Yeah.
pipe in that I agree with you that, you know, I think we should be looking at systems-wide approaches. You know, what the town can do, what the town can facilitate for
Right.
the community. That seems within our charge.
great. Okay. So I'll move us to the municipally owned solar, which, again, this is sort of like next steps because these things have bubbled up. Gail, I don't know if you, I mean, it was sort of you and me and Graham were sort of thinking about this. We did you know, we had I'm forgetting the name of the company, whoever Marianne pointed us to, that basically said, you know, it'd be $2,000 per building to do an assessment, et cetera.
oh,
You know, and then I
3D
reached,
squared.
yeah, and then I reached out to, or attempted to reach out to the old energy committee, because apparently they had done work on some of this stuff, but
Right.
no one ever responded. So
Right.
we sort of have a couple of streams of information, but it doesn't lead us to a next step. And so part of the question is, and again, we can table this until Graham comes, since he's,
Right.
you know, got expertise, but I think the outstanding question is, okay, the old committee did some stuff, but that hasn't gone anywhere any, you know, at this
Mhm.
point. We have a quote for where to go. We have no grant money and we don't really have a plan. So like, what's our next step?
Mhm.
So Gail?
Yeah.
The distinction, I think, is between, do you want your sources of solar in your town, which is municipal, or outside your town, which is not? In other words, we could put solar panels on the roof of Home Depot in Hadley.
Mhm.
That would be community solar.
Right.
It is not municipal solar. It's not that we have to own the property on which the solar exists.
Right, and that is the differentiation. So like, I think if Mary Ann
And our,
pops in,
the limits in Shutesbury of where we could place solar are, if not extreme, certainly limited, let us say.
yeah, I don't think it's a townwide solution. It sort of gets to the same point of like, so if we're thinking about what the town should be doing, should all the buildings in town have solar panels and generating their own electricity? Like, that's a question. Because if they're not, they could buy from community solar if we go that route. I guess the town could, I don't know if the town could participate as a customer for CCA, but that would be a question. But that's sort of the open question. Should we spend the time and energy looking into panels on town-owned buildings or town-owned land to meet even just municipal demand? I don't think we can. I think we figured out that we don't have enough open space
Right.
to do anything that's significant, but
Right.
it's the question of walking the walk. So if the town is incentivizing solar for residents, which is the next topic, should the town be doing it on their own buildings? And we could recommend that and figure out what the path is. And I don't have the answer to that. Leslie?
Well, I mean, I know the buildings are limited, but we have a lot of roads. And I know that communities, even in Europe, like they're putting solar like on roads and they're putting solar in parking lots. So, I mean, I think if the town wanted to do it, it would certainly be a puzzle. And I think some of the town buildings are not in good shape. So it's, but I did have a conversation with Mary Ann, and it seemed like there was some grant money other than what this town missed, like, in terms. So there may be some other options for the town to get money to help us with this.
Yeah, I think with the climate bill, the Inflation Reduction Act,
Right.
there's going to be infrastructure money. And so that's part of it. It's like, if we could figure out if we recommend something, just like, it's the same opportunity / dilemma that the ARPA money had, which is the select board was looking for recommendations about ARPA money. We didn't have our act together to really advocate. So if we can sort of figure out if we think it's a recommendation for the town, we do some homework, and then we can, step forward. So maybe we just sort of table this a little bit until Graham comes next time, but we could just be thinking about, it's sort of a big if, and if yes, how and when, et cetera. Gail, did you want to just talk about the incentivizing solar and battery for residents? Because you had the calculator was one of the things you wanted to talk
Right,
about.
that would be one response. That's aimed at individuals, not municipal buildings particularly, but and this is what I sent out yesterday, today. Try it on for size. It tells you what incentives or immediate rebates would be available for various levels of energy conservation in your own place. So in terms of incentives, this would be individual. And it's aimed at tax-based, which means municipal buildings do not count because municipalities are not tax-based. There's no incentive to reduce your tax burden on a town. But that would be one way to go about it.
Yeah, Leslie?
I looked at what Gail sent and I was totally confused with the different options. So was that like if you would get it from solar, or was it like you could get solar, or I just saw all these things that I don't use, so I didn't know.
There were a whole bunch of different options. So if you wanted
Right.
to put on solar on your house, if you wanted to put a heat pump in your house, if you wanted to do any of these various things, here are the incentives and or discounts that are available because of the new legislation.
Right.
And then you would follow up with applying for any of those particular things.
Yeah, I guess when I looked at it, I was like, well, all these things don't make sense for my house. So,
Oops.
so I was like, well, I mean, I have a really nice green situation here, but I don't really understand the heat pump, like for my dryer. Or I guess I just didn't understand
Yeah.
all those things.
Well, I think getting back to sort of like the townwide stuff, it might be,
Some people may understand it and need it and be ready.
well, if we, it's a good, I mean, it's a good indicator that if we're sending stuff out, we have to sort of make sure that people, we don't confuse
Right.
people.
Right.
I mean, that's a good reminder.
I
It
was
also, it also seems like, I mean, some of this stuff is going to be households stepping into it, you know, so like, you know, you can do Mass Save and Mass Save can offer discounts on certain things.
Right.
I think for us, we can be supportive of that, but it might be, you know, the state has yet to catch up, you know, so the state could say, oh, if towns, you know, have a certain amount of subscribership in X, you know,
Right.
they're eligible for this grant, you know, like a green communities kind of thing, or, so I'm not sure if we're ready for prime time with that, only because the state's still figuring stuff out, but Gail?
I could post that on the website though, right along with the Mass Saves blurb. Here's another tool
Yeah,
which you can go to and use or not. I mean, this is one way to give you a direction for avenues you might pursue or
yeah.
not.
That would be, I think that would be great. I mean,
Okay.
if we can provide those resources on the website,
Yep.
that's helpful.
That it's individualized seems to me to be key. The zip code, do you own or rent? And go from there.
Yeah, I mean, it's only helpful. You know, and if we're not emailing it out and really pushing it in an active way,
Okay.
then we have
I'll post
less
it.
responsibility to answer the questions if
Okay,
people get confused. And if they do get confused, we'll send them to you.
Don't send it to me because I'm confused by the survey.
Yeah. So I would say let's jump over Community Solar since Marianne's not here and just do the other stuff. And if she shows up, we can have that conversation.
Yeah, I'll give her one more call.
Yeah. Well, I would say Leslie, you know, Leslie, come back.
Yeah, I'm here. I can hear everything.
Oh,
I think I'm
if
going outside the house. Yeah.
you know, I mean, if she shows up, it would be good to have the conversation in terms of timeliness. If she
Mhm.
doesn't show up, it's not a bad idea to have the conversation with more people. It just sort of messes up the
Yeah.
whole
Absolutely. Yeah.
prep for
Mhm.
the forum. So I don't know, you can call her, but I think it's,
let it go.
yeah.
Well, I mean, you know, we're missing Nate, who I know had a really great question. And he really opened the door to, like, you know, what Miriam was saying, like we're,
Yeah,
you know, to own it, we're that we need more time, but to do what I'm doing, anyone could do that now.
Yeah.
So it's different.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
we
give her a
also
call. I just wanted to grab you before you went and did that.
well, you know, one way or another, I'll have a conversation with Marianne, even if she doesn't show up tonight. You know, it's kind of a mixed blessing that she's not here because we're missing like 3 of our members.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'll let it
Okay.
go.
Okay.
I'll let it go.
So the next thing, we're doing good.
Just zooming along here.
Yeah. So the next item was just reframing some of our priorities, and then it was sort of, we had talked about just looking at the prioritization. So the 2 things I wanted to share, and one of them already did, which is household versus individual framing, which it sounds like makes sense to people. And then the other thing I got from the Amherst conversation, which made me reflect, but you know, they were doing a lot of conversation about transportation, you know, so they were looking at bus routes, for example. And because Amherst is a destination for commuting as opposed to us, they were thinking about, you know, how do they encourage large employers, for example, to change how people are commuting, whether it's walking, biking, carpooling, et cetera. So the whole idea of transport is something that wasn't really in our conversations. And I looked at the hazard mitigation and municipal vulnerability plans to see what was there. And there's some discussion, like town walkability is there. So that is that's a form of transport. And there's emergency related transportation. So if we have an emergency, do we have the ability to transfer people? Just given, you know, limited roads and isolation and things like that. But that whole other component was not part of the conversation about, you know, is there a way of changing commuting and stuff. And so I mostly just wanted to put transportation into the mix. It's not to say we should have a conversation about it, but does it seem like in the array of things that we might want to be considering? I mean, transportation is a huge factor in national energy usage and climate. So it seemed like if we should at least have it on our radar, even if
Yeah.
we're less. So Leslie and then Gail.
Well, I know I have neighbors and friends in Shutesbury who have electric bikes and mountain bikes and, and I like to bike up to the library myself. But I don't always, I'm pretty adventurous, but I don't think our townspeople, are really watching out for those of us on bikes. But those are two different issues. Like, how can we make it safer for somebody like me that's just biking 5 miles back and forth to pick up a CD or something, and people who are really, going to work with their electric bikes. And like Amherst has a whole electric bike system. Maybe we could get a grant here where people can do that as well. So they could bike in, there's lots of people from Shutesbury that go into Amherst or go into Northampton, really connect the dots with less cars on the road.
Yeah, no, I'll just toot my own horn for a second. So I got Natalie Blay to file legislation that got passed for
Great.
subsidies for e-bikes. So
Okay.
somewhere in the
Excellent.
next year, there'll be up to $500 subsidies for
Wow.
e-bikes and $750 for low income folks. So,
All right.
and there's $1 million in there. So it'll
Wow.
be, yeah,
Wow.
so it'll actually make a difference. But I think figuring out, and part of my pitch to her, which she got because thinks rural, is oftentimes when we're thinking about this stuff, it's about public transportation,
Right.
and so disconnected rural communities who don't have public transportation, how do you change transportation? And so it's a tougher nut to crack, but I think there's walkability, and safety is directly connected. I mean, I remember when my kids would ride their bike up to the school, Pratt Corner was fine, West Pelham was okay, Leverett Road was a little scary.
Yeah.
And so, you don't want to send your kid on the bike, even if it makes sense, if you're worried about their safety.
Right.
So, and walkers on Leverett Road. So the whole walkability thing, it ties to that. Gail, what were you going to say?
Both FRPA and PVTA are coming before the select board for consideration. So that would be bus routes and at request, even in and outside the county. So that whole thing would be there. I would like to know though, is there any activity on the sidewalk building, the complete streets thing? Because in Shutesbury, at least, there's so many people who would profit from, take advantage of sidewalk along the highway for walking, making safe travel for bikers or for walkers.
Yeah.
Right.
Is there an activity on that?
I haven't looked in a while. I mean, I know we're eligible because I wrote the policy for the select board to make us eligible.
I knew I was
but-
asking.
Yeah, I don't know, but I think it's worth looking into. And when I was doing that research, I did talk to FERCog, and it's Walk Boston is the organization that does this stuff statewide,
Okay.
and it's a misnomer because they're not just Boston anymore. But what FERCog said is people tend to think of that as urban only, but there are rural solutions for this walkability stuff. So it'd be worthwhile for us to look into it. And I mean, I could try unless you were interested, but I agree. Complete Streets that's the funding source for this stuff.
Yep.
Leslie, you raised your hand some more.
Yeah, that was another thing that I thought of several times as I bike up to the library on Leverett Road. And I think there's all this grass, like on the side of the road, that could be a bike path.
Yep.
Not, in a lot of places, it's just lawn.
Yeah, and I think, and I've mentioned this before, but if we're doing the library, there's, using, just going from the school to the library is an alternative route, if you build something in there. So, well, it sounds like transportation is at least something we want to consider. So how we do it is many more conversations, but it seems like transportation is part of it. So that's cool. And then I think I'm gonna send this out, but let me just share my screen real briefly. Where is it? There it is. I just want to make it so you can read it. So I think I shared this last month, but this is sort of the consolidated, and we were going to sort of revisit this. I can't remember. So if I asked everybody to, I think I asked everybody to look at it and see if their priorities, but like for this column here is me on the far right.
Excuse me,
And-
Michael, can you
yeah.
blow it more?
Yeah,
Thank you.
how's that?
Yeah, now I can
Much
see.
better. Thank you.
Okay, cool. So I basically took the priorities that we had, that was previously in Excel that was like from the municipal vulnerability plan and the hazard mitigation plan. And that's the sources here. And these are where each of those reports prioritize them. And then the question was, do we want to reprioritize them now that they're sort of sitting in our lap, and being that it's, a year or two later after these reports are done? I think MVP is maybe even 3 years at this point. So I went through and just sort of changed a couple. And to give you an example, the effective emergency communication, while important, I thought, well, all things considered, I'd make it a medium. It's really about our effort, how do we engage people? And the master plan, just for practicality, I know there's no bandwidth at the planning board. So it could be high, but it's more practically medium. So I guess my question is, does it make sense to maybe table this conversation and do it with the larger group and just make sure that
Yes,
we have a prioritization that works?
Right,
yes, please.
yes.
Okay, so we can table that. So I think we're almost through our agenda besides the minutes. So there's a few new items for consideration that popped up. One we'll wait on, which I think is Mary Ann was going to talk about. Well, the question was, and Leslie, maybe you can just do it, but did we want to have a presentation by Mary Ann about regenerative, I can't say that word, regenerative options? And just to learn more about what that is. It sounds like, Leslie, it's correct that that's an area of expertise for Mary Ann?
Well, I know something about it. I think Zoe does too. I mean, yeah, I think the town, even regenerative agriculture, as I'm talking about, just different ways of using the land that promotes sustainability. There's a lot of land in town that could be used regeneratively. I'm just going to bring it into a circle by being vague and,
Yeah.
I know
Yes.
Mary Ann had some specific things, and I'm sure Zoe and I would jump in as well.
Okay.
Maybe other people too, just.
Would it be reasonable if for maybe you to touch base with the two of them and figure out, and we could put it on an agenda in the next few months?
Yeah.
I don't think it's pressing, but somewhere in the next few months, you can figure out, well, if we carve out half an hour as sort of an educational opportunity for the committee, and the three of you can collectively share. Gail?
And maybe check in with Open Space Committee. See if they have some ideas about how space might be used.
Okay.
You mean
Is
like
there-
me, Zoe and Mary Ann, or like who's on the
No,
open
Open
space?
Space Committee is basically Penny Jakes
Uh-huh.
and
Okay.
Barbara Bigelow and myself.
Do you have Gail, do you have a sense of, well, you'll be part of the conversation when we do this thing just for us, but is there things that you're thinking of in particular?
Well, I was thinking in terms of the open space and recreation plan and how the use of open space might be used for regenerative in terms of coordination with the garden plans from the Recreation Committee, in plans of food sources, in sources of, these are things, seems to me, to explore both with open space and with regenerative design. And maybe even recreation, if there are going to be people who tend these gardens.
One thing we need to be I'm sorry, my back's hurting me, so I'm lying back. I am focusing.
Yeah, you look comfortable, even though you might be
Yeah.
in pain.
I mean, because I've been educating myself about this, and there are limitations around how we can use town-owned property.
Right.
One of the issues, of course, is that some town-owned property is forested. And so, there's trade-offs if we want to put solar in an area where you're going to have to take down trees. But some of the big tracts of town-owned land have contamination issues.
Hmm.
And the other issue up around town center and where the common is that the common is has some protections as a historical site. So I don't think we can turn that into a community garden site.
But those need to be investigated, is all
Right.
I'm saying.
I'm just sharing what I do know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I had spoken to Mary Ann about the contamination issue and said, let's use a regenerative practice of using mushrooms to extract the contamination. That's part of regenerative design. And Mary Ann was like, we need a study first. And I'm like, I know somebody locally would bring the mushrooms in and we'll know better. You could study it too, but
You'll get lots of volunteers.
yeah, and in regenerative design, we would never take down the forest for solar. That's like a net loss when there's no gain there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and regenerative design would be like looking at the knotweed growing near town hall and saying, this is an asset and what is it, really looking at what the plants are telling us about what we need and not just throwing pesticide. Regenerative design would say, one of the things I would love to see is no pesticides, no insecticides, no herbicides used by the town. That would be a regenerative design.
Well, that would be awesome.
Yeah, well, that's, in my world, we would just be doing that.
Well, that would be a
That's my-
major accomplishment.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason for the town to have this committee and then be spraying. It's like, doesn't make any sense to me.
Right.
Okay, so Leslie, I think you got marching orders to sort of pull together a group
Yeah.
of people and
Okay,
and
well,
then- and
Mary
just-
Ann and Zoe is a start, and knowing that Gail's on that committee, I think you've heard some of my ideas, and they're radical and they're rebellious, and I'm willing to stick my toe in that water, but I get discouraged in this committee a lot. So I just want to let you know that sometimes I'm just discouraged, like, can I really even bring this stuff up? So I'm glad I could tonight.
yeah, doing town stuff can be a challenge, shall we say?
Thank
So,
you for your perseverance, Leslie.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, I'm nervous because I know
Oh.
we're a funnel. And I just, I'd love to see the select board on board with this stuff. And I'm an optimistic person, but not when it comes to our town government.
It's all about how it gets presented, and I think
Okay.
and to
Absolutely.
Gail's point, the more outreach and research we do,
Okay,
I think, if it's defensible and we've done our homework, then it's an easier pitch.
Okay. thank you.
So, sure. So Miriam had an idea. Actually, I think Miriam, I mentioned it to Rita already, but I wanted, Miriam, I'll let you say it, but it's about the fundraising, the environmentally oriented fundraising.
Well, do you want to say about the Green Communities Grant? Do you want to share that?
Gail has got the next thing, so I thought I'd just sort of wrap those two together, but I'll just pitch it and then you can tell me if I left anything out. So in, the green communities, well, I guess it goes into the green communities, but so this grant got written backwards that it was, but there's lots of opportunities out there to get money, and
Well, does everybody know that the grant got written? Because I don't know, I don't even know what the grant is, so.
Well, anyway.
Yeah.
But hold off that for a sec. So there's a lot of opportunities. So like how Gail was just talking about complete streets. Just say we find a complete streets opportunity. One of the challenges, lots of people are doing lots of things, so we don't necessarily have the bandwidth to either find and then write a proposal. And so what Miriam suggested is there's enough people in town who have the ability to write grants, but they just need to know the direction and the opportunity. And so I mentioned to Rita, she thought it was a good idea, and so it could be that ECAC says for climate, energy, environmentally related things, we'd like to recruit a group of people who are on call to write grants. We would sort of hand it over to them, orient them, and be sort of the conduit, but it wouldn't be on us as individuals to necessarily write the particular grant. So that was your suggestion, right, Miriam? Did I get it right?
Yeah, that, it's not really clear who owns the grant writing in town government. Is it the town administrator? Is it individual boards? And it seems to me that having designated group of people with some demonstrated experience in writing grants, particularly around environmental grants, I'm talking about, not just grants in general, because there are lots of different kinds of grants, but that was my thought.
Yeah. Gail?
That's what FERCog's in the business for.
Yeah.
And they have all kinds of staff availability and know-how on particularly focused grants. And actually, they're the ones who wrote this grant that Becky Torres submitted for the town. She provided, or she backed up some of the data that they needed, but they were the ones who wrote the grant. And
Great.
that
Who
is
was
their
that?
service.
Who is that? Gail?
Franklin County Regional
Council
Office
of
of
Governments.
Governments.
Council. And well, I don't know if that's actually true, Gail. I mean, I think they write grants where it makes sense for them to write grants, but for like an individual thing for a town, they don't have the bandwidth. I mean, they're ultimately, although they provide the county services, they're really just a nonprofit that's equally stretched. So like both because I did a little work for them, and then when I was on select board, if there's an opportunity, they might gather towns together. But if we came up with complete streets and we said, would you write it for us? Unless there was a regional perspective,
Right.
they probably wouldn't do it.
This is true though, in particular for the green communities grants. They have the know-how, they know the forms, they know what has to be included and submitted and blah, 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 and depend on the towns for providing them with the data, which is what Becky gave them from our database. And I must say that the audit that was performed this year was very different from the audit from 2009. So we had asked for an audit to be done so that we would have the basis of writing a grant. But it turns out the audit was an entirely different animal this time around. And the requirements for writing from the basis of this audit were all on envelope, building envelope. Nothing to do with internal energy. And my guess is that they learned the hard way that they did all kinds of internal energy stuff for communities without checking the envelope. And it was for naught because there were gaps in airspace or whatever. Anyway, what Becky accomplished in this, and she went ahead and wrote the grant based on the audit of the building envelopes, will enable us then to apply for grants for internal systems, for energy efficiency, for HVAC, for mini splits, for whatever. But those will be dependent upon our accomplishing these weatherizations, the external envelope changes, before we can even apply for those grants.
I got confused because when I talked to Rita about it, it was following a conversation she had with Becky about the LEDs. So where are the LEDs a subsequent component?
That's a questionable thing. Yeah. It has to do with the life of the repay value. And yeah, I don't get it, but that's a maybe.
Okay.
But the building envelope is going to be for sure. And all the parameters are in that bill, in the submission, all the numbers are there. And the numbers are drawn from the Insight Energy, the Mass Energy Insight
That you got
database, which we finally got access to.
Right.
In the meantime, I have asked that the annual reports, the Green Communities annual reports, be given us as a committee, so we know the basis of what we're reporting as a town every year since 2011.
If we get, the thing that's unclear to me about the green communities, if we get this grant, what does that mean for subsequent grants in terms of both being able to apply and who writes them? Because it seemed like my operating assumption based on, what you've been talking about is that we would track green communities and we would have a discussion about what we would apply for. So going forward, does that still hold water?
Yes and no. First, before we can apply for any grant for internal systems, building internal systems, we have to accomplish these weatherization things that are in this grant. So if the grant is not provided, we're up shit creek.
And if we get it, and then we could apply for things at the school.
If we get it and the things are actually done, then we have the basis to apply for all these other internal system projects.
Okay.
Heating, lighting, electricity.
Okay.
In
that
other
makes
words,
sense.
we need to show a track record of success.
Yes.
like volunteer-
Of accomplished things. And it makes good sense, actually. It means that the building envelope is tight enough that any changes internally will be effective.
Mhm.
That it would have been helpful for us to know that, but
Yes.
now we know.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank
But
you
it
for
also-
tracking
But it
that.
also means that we cannot apply for any of those Green Communities grants, projects, until A, this grant has been awarded, and B, the vendor has accomplished all those things that are cited in the grant.
Okay. So in terms of that particular source of funding, we're on hold for a while, but we'll look at the other stuff.
Right.
So in terms of this idea of a proposal writing committee, I mean, I did mention it to Rita, Miriam, after you and I talked. She seemed to think it was a good idea. I'm happy to put it forth and sort of recommend it more formally to, the select board consider it. I don't know if we wanted to sit on it for a little bit and figure out, because how it works in the selection process, like, is that something the select board would do? Or would we do it? And, like figuring out some of those details, and who, quote unquote, manages the person who's just say 5 people raise their hand, and we have to figure out, well, who is actually writing the proposal, and, they're volunteers for volunteers. So the accountability could get a little bit weak.
We also might get clarity from FERCog. What are the parameters of their grant writing assistance? Are they specific topics? Are there specific grant applications? Are there specific, who knows?
I could
Okay.
reach, I have to reach out to them about another grant situation. So I'm behind in a phone call that I need to make. I could reach out and try to get some information about that.
Okay.
The person who helped Becky write this grant was Allison Gage.
Mhm.
Yeah. I was thinking Bob Dean might also be the person. He's the one who is the conduit for all this energy and
So
climate
if you
stuff.
have, ask him and
Yeah.
ask Allison and ask anybody you have contact with to see what at FERCog can they offer us as a town?
The Natural Resources Planning Department,
Yes,
where this is all coming out of.
Yep.
Do you want to ask them? And I can ask Bob. Bob sits somewhere else in FERCog, but
Yeah, I can ask them.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
they'll
and
get
then-
some
and
kind of-
they-
and with examples, if we want to write a grant for complete streets, can you help us? Yes or no?
Mhm,
Yeah.
Or if not you, who else at FERCog?
mhm.
Can you spell me FERCog? Because I know it's an acronym for something, but
Yeah.
I'm
FRCOG,
FRCOG. Thank you.
Franklin Regional Council of Governments.
I had
Thank
it
you.
backwards, didn't I?
It's the Confederacy of Participating Towns, since we don't have county government anymore.
There you go.
So I think the only last thing, well, we got minutes, but Are we good with the changing the date? Gail, is there anything else you wanted to share? I'll do this, the online.
You're gonna
poll.
send out a poll and we'll answer and you'll deal accordingly?
Yeah, I think,
Sounds good.
okay, cool. So why don't we do the minutes and then I think we're done.
Yay.
So do I have a motion to consider the minutes of, what was the date? September 13th, 2022.
So moved.
Got a second?
I'll second.
Cool. So anyone have any comments? I had two. Actually, I had three, very small, but Miriam, in that first community choice aggregation discussion, it was like 8 lines down. It
Okay.
said, goal is to hold forum in October. And then later, we talked about setting the date for November 9th. And so I think just to,
I've got go.
it's October is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's the 10th line down in that section.
Okay, right.
I would
Go-
just get rid of that sentence because it's sort of confusing because you read down a few more lines and then we come up with November 9th. So
Okay, yep.
That, and then the other thing, oh, I don't even know how to tell you. It's on the second page. It's the line that begins in the process.
Later, CCA takes later in the process. Okay.
Yeah. This is the next part. Have to approve the move. What the move is that a typo
Uh,
or is that motion?
I don't know though. I can't tell you.
Okay.
I don't know. Have to. The.
I mean, I think it's the town approving the warrant and then we get a
Yeah.
broker.
Okay, town, how about town has to approve the motion, get a broker.
Yeah.
approval. Yeah.
That sounds good. And then my other one just is a mega thing. I mean, this happens in planning board meetings and it makes me crazy, but would you mind just sticking some paragraphs in these things?
Yeah,
It's too hard to read. I mean,
yeah,
because I think, the intent with minutes, if you look at the AG's offices, a reasonable person should understand what happened at the meeting.
Yeah,
And like, it's just too dense, like reasonable people can't get through this visually.
Way too much
So-
detail.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, I don't even mind the detail. The detail is fine, but it's like, it's
yeah,
impenetrable without the paragraphs.
Yeah.
right.
So, but other than that, I think it was great.
Okay.
So,
I broke up
so-
a paragraph.
great.
So if you make those changes, Miriam, and then send it to me, I'll convert it to a PDF and send it off to Grace.
Okay,
Great. So why don't we,
well, do you have an idea of where you would like a paragraph to be? It's a little hard to-
I'll send it to you.
Okay, Michael.
So since it's just spaces, I don't think we need to do it during the meeting. So I'll do a roll call. So all in favor of approving the minutes, Gail,
Aye.
Miriam,
Aye.
Leslie,
Aye.
and I'm an aye. Okay, unanimously approved. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Second?
I second.
Okay. Leslie,
Aye.
Gail,
Aye.
Miriam,
Aye.
and I'm an aye. Cool. Well, we had a very nice intimate meeting. I think we did good. So.
We
and,
are good.
Yeah. And,
And-
and-
Wait a minute, Michael, I'm taking the minutes. So you made the motion to adjourn and Gail seconded?
no, someone else made the motion.
Gail?
I made the motion. Miriam
Okay.
seconded.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for doing that. And Leslie, just let me know by email, like, aside what Mary Ann's, we'll just plan on next time. Once we know the meeting date, I'll let
Right.
you know and you can reach out to
Perfect.
Mary Ann.
Perfect.
But I'll send out the meeting poll thing the next day or two. So
Okay.
have a wonderful evening all. Hope your back
Thank
feels
you.
better, Miriam.
And nice weekend. Happy
See-
fall, y'all.
Yes, it's beautiful.
I like that. See ya.
Good night.